Okay, we're still on lesson 38 and we're dealing with oligopoly, and I think now we're sort of getting an understanding of and beginning to see the big picture. Now really you can test any model in terms of, I'm looking for a pen again, you can test any model in terms of economic efficiency, dynamic efficient, allocative efficiency and productive efficiency, and if an industry fulfill those models, we can say, well, that is a good industry. Now we can argue a lot of the time that a lot of oligopolies display those characteristics. It's very difficult to prove. I mean, I'm only talking about anecdotal evidence, but we're only doing A-level economics. You would have to do a PhD to really find out whether or not industries conform to that model. But let's take the car industry, for example, which I've already spoken about. It is innovative. There is loads and loads of research and development. Do you remember I was talking about Nissan, cost optimization? And often the manufacturing processes are incredibly productive. There's high productivity involved. Now, so within an exam, we can draw this model with the economies of scale. You can remember doing it previously, where the average cost is much lower on this one here than it is either in a competitive market or in a previous monopoly without economies of scale. So therefore, the lowest price is here and the highest output is here. So we're sort of moving towards allocative efficiency, and there's a better use of scarce resources to maximize economic welfare. So it fulfills those two criteria. It's also dynamic because there's lots of research and development to create that. You've also got a lower average total cost curve. So it fulfills every single one of those criteria. And that is, right, that is practical. You're talking about an actual industry. You've got a nice bit of theory in there in terms of the diagram, and you brought in all those different concepts. So you've got a very powerful economics A-level answer. If we look at the computer industry, now we could argue that's more of a monopoly than an oligopoly, but you could also argue it's an oligopoly. Okay. Now in this particular case, we can quite easily draw the monopoly diagram, and we can say, well, perfect competition is better than monopoly because there's a deadweight welfare loss. So you can very, very quickly draw that diagram down here. So you've got demand is equal to AR, MR going down there. Got the MC curve going there, okay, and that is the price of monopoly. However, there is a welfare loss of this area here because in perfect competition we'll be having that price and that output, okay? So we can draw that very, very quickly in an exam. However, we all know that Apple is incredibly innovative as a firm, and they brought out completely new products. In fact, it was Nokia who were the first ones who actually built a brand new version of that phone. Now it's extremely innovative, and it can do all the various things on there. So that is an example of an oligopoly market, right? But a market that makes extremely high profits, but a market that is incredible in terms of what it's produced, and therefore it makes people more productive. I was absolutely staggered when I brought an Apple computer and iMovie so I could put all this together. The customer service in the Apple shop was incredible, right? It wasn't like going into a great big corporate firm. It was very personal. It was a bit too cheesy for me actually, but it was very personal. They gave me excellent advice, and the amount of money that I spent in terms of what I could do is pretty astonishing. So that is an example of massive rise in productivity. So also within this place, we have the idea of competition. If there are very high profits in this area, then what you'll find is that the model of creative destruction will take place. Other people will look at that model and say, actually, I think I can make loads of money out of it. The next one there is the supermarkets, Aldi, Lidl and everything else, and what's happened in that place. Now at one stage, Tesco's has 38% of the market in the UK. Right. It's also a really good firm. It's expanded abroad. It's expanded in America, it failed, it's expanded in Korea, it's worked, it's expanded in Thailand. Right. But that market is actually really, really competitive. And what happened was the recession came along, and then people just wanted lower prices. And Aldi and Lidl fulfilled that function, and they also did it with a certain amount of quality. So I would say that the supermarket is a competitive market. Previously, there may have been a bit of tacit collusion going on, where everyone was charging quite high prices and making lots of money out of it. However, I would even argue that Tesco's did in fact bring about low prices for the consumer, so there was a movement towards allocative efficiency. Now, the banks is a completely different story. The banks, I don't know why I drew this diagram in there, but the banks, there isn't a lot of competition in that industry, and there has definitely been a lot of tacit collusion, if not covert collusion, going on in that area, where they have missold policies, they've manipulated interest rates, they've got into a lot of dodgy investments, things have got out of control, a lot of behavioural economics in there. Have they worked for the good of society? You could make a very strong case in an A-level essay that probably not. Right. So as regards A-level economics, you've got some really good examples here and some really good theory and some good diagrams in. It is the perfect essay. So this is all to do with oligopoly. Finally, over here, we've got, okay, what do oligopolies try and do? Well, they do try and create brands. Right, Weetabix try and create a brand, Nabisco try and create a brand, because if you could create a brand, it's a barrier to entry. It's much harder for someone else to get into that industry. It's the hardest market to get into is creating your own product. Okay. Oil, there is an obvious cartel on there. It's open to everyone. It's overt collusion, and because they've got an inelastic demand for their product, they can raise the price. However, even in this industry, substitutes will come along. There will be a process of creative destruction, and obviously I'm into the renewable sector, but I believe the renewable sector will completely, at some stage in our lives, not completely wipe out, because oil is a fantastic resource, but it will hit the oil industry. Now, when it hits the oil industry, actually conversely what happens with oil is that, okay, they thought, great, we've got a great product here, we can make loads of money out of it, we can just raise the price. Okay, so therefore that is not allocatively efficient. However, when they see the threat of renewable energy come along, then they'll suddenly reduce the price again. Basically, it works about $120 a barrel. The renewable sector really comes in big time, and then they will reduce their prices to knock out the renewable sector. So there is competition even in that industry. High profits, if you make high profits, you can get research and development, you make lots of research and development, you can have economic efficiency, dynamic efficiency, productive and allocative efficiency, as seen within the car industry. Remember I spoke about Nissan and cost optimization. And then we've also got this model of game theory on here. Right, so what I'm now going to do is, at the end of this, I'm just going to draw all the diagrams on the board about oligopoly, and you've got to have all of this in your head when you go into the exam and to be able to use those diagrams effectively. And if I'm running a really, really short course, right, I'm trying to teach this very, very quickly, I just teach the students all the diagrams and say, use those in the exams, apply those in the examination with a bit of analysis, and you're going to come out with a good grade. And you know what? It works. Okay, so we're still on lesson 38, and can remember when I said we've got perfect competition out here, and then we've got monopolistic competition here, and I'm not really quite sure why it's on the syllabus, but the main thing about it is that it's like perfect competition apart from the brands, and then we have oligopoly here. Now virtually a lot of big firms will enter this particular area, so oligopoly is a pretty important area obviously, and then over here we've got monopoly. And some of the arguments for monopoly are sort of quite similar to the arguments that you also have for oligopoly. But really what I want to do today is to show you all the different diagrams involved, because sometimes it can be quite confusing. And as students, you need to be able to grasp all of these. So if you can draw a diagram and then analyse them and make some judgments about them and bring in the various concepts, you're going to get a very, very good grade. But the exams won't be easy. They will chuck concepts at you and you have to react to those different ideas. Right, well, the first thing is if firms do in fact collude together, then they act as a monopoly. And the problem with a monopoly is you end up with a dead weight welfare loss of this area here. If we compare that to perfect competition, which will be that price, so the price will be lower and the output will be higher, then all that area there will be a dead weight welfare loss. So that's an argument against oligopolies. The next one is this Kinked demand theory, and some students, that's all they know about oligopoly, have already said this, and the example of price rigidity, and you're faced with an elastic demand curve here, an inelastic demand curve here, so there's no point raising your price because no one else is going to follow, there's no point reducing your price because everybody will follow your actions. that I've seen them give a 50-mark question on that, and everyone, if you know it, you're going to get 15 out of 15 on that question. And then there's this diagram here that, once again, you have the monopoly diagram on the right. You just draw a straightforward one with the price then moving across here, and this is the average total cost curve of this particular firm. Now, if you collude together, every firm is given a quota. The reason why that is the case is because you're faced with an inelastic demand, and with inelastic demand you would want to raise your price. So what happens there is, if you give them that much, okay, they're going to make money out of it, obviously, but if the firm did cheat and increased its quota, then they'd make even more money out of that process. So there's always an incentive to cheat with collusion. Obviously, colluding in terms of UK companies is against competition policy, and you'll be fined if you are found out. But collusion in terms of oil, it's completely open. Oil producers get together and decide on quotas for each country, so they manipulate the market like that. So there's one other word I should put down here. I've just forgotten it. Creative destruction. Can I put it on here now? Creative destruction. The next one on here, you must be able to draw this diagram, which is monopoly with economies of scale. So it's quite a hard diagram to draw. You've got to draw this line right up here and this line much further down. But the basic argument is, if you get economies of scale, which I haven't put on there, okay, so you get econ of scale, then actually, even compared to a competitive market, which is this price and this output on here, you're going to have a lower price and you're going to have more output. So that is clearly a good market to be in. Okay, so that is monopoly with economies of scale. Now, also within this, we have all of these things, all of these terms on here: dynamic efficiency, allocative efficiency, productive efficiency, and economic efficiency. And you want to use those all of the time. Now, quite clearly, in this case, a firm must be dynamically efficient because it must have invested to create this new process of doing things. Think of Nissan cars. It must be allocative. Yes, it is, because we now have a lower price. So that's better for the consumer. There's a rise in consumer surplus. Is it productive? Yes, it is, because the average cost has fallen. So you're moving towards greater productive efficiency. Is it economic efficiency? Yes, it is, because you're using scarce resources to maximize economic and social welfare. And we're moving towards that point. So this diagram here shows why oligopoly can be good for the consumer. Remember, this is oligopoly, right? So you can have this, I've called it monopoly with economies of scale, but you can call it oligopoly with economies of scale, but clearly an oligopoly can also achieve economies of scale. And then we move to this part of the theory here, which is game theory. And you know, what do firms do? We don't know what other firms are going to do. So there's interdependence and uncertainty. And the best option is if there is tacit collusion, where both firms will make £6 million each because they both decide on a price of £1 for their products. However, the risk-free zone, and you can never trust your competitors, is to go where you both charge 80p and you're both going to make £5 million each. Now, obviously, this example has been made so it works. So learn this example. Clearly here, if this firm charges a quid, firm X, then, and this firm Y charges 80p, then firm Y is going to make 7 million and firm X is going to only make 3.5 million. So it's a risky strategy to take, because this other firm may cheat or you may be found out here. But it's a nice model to be able to use. And then we've spoken about all of these already, and then think about different industries, because your essay is so much better when you talk about all of these. I've already spoken about all of those. And then we've got this idea of creative destruction, which I've used two examples here, even with the oil industry, which makes enormous amounts of profit, right? It may be the case that oil one day may go out of fashion, and I'm specifically talking about renewables. As the price of oil goes up, people may get more and more into the renewable sector. To a certain degree, that's already happening. So that's the idea of creative destruction. So Joseph Schumpeter, who's lived in 1860 to 1950, something like that. Now, what he said, first of all, we had canals, okay, to transport goods, and that helped in the Industrial Revolution. And then we had railways, and nobody thought that anybody would ever have a better form of transport than that. And then we had trucks on the roads. So there are different ways in which, you know, that things will change over time. even I think right now people are thinking, oh, Barclays is great and HSBC is great. They'll never ever go bust. RBS is great. RBS went bust. But even within this process, I think there will be creative destruction. And I think already in terms of the supermarkets, this has already occurred. Whoever would have thought that Tesco's would have had hard times 10 years ago? You know, there was 36% of all expenditure of supermarkets took place at Tesco's within the UK. Enormous sums of money. However, Aldi and Lidl have come on the scene and sort of conformed to all of these models here. They charge even lower prices than the supermarkets. The energy market's a slightly different one in the sense that, you know, there may well be tacit collusion on there. You know, there may be no written documentation that they all join together and charge high prices. But they've also made their bills so expensive that no one understands them. You know, can you really bother to find out what your kilowatt is at midnight or whatever, if you really want to work it out, right? But even now, their website's available, so you can actually work out what's the best tariff for you. I've never personally used them. I just pay up. I'm a really good example of customer inertia in terms of that industry. But even this industry here may change, and it may change with the renewable sector on there. So creative destruction will take place, and that's what makes the world an exciting place. In a sense, there's a bit of creative destruction taking place in teaching, because what I'm doing here is delivering 100 talks on economics A level. So therefore you can do it in your own time, and you can watch it in your own time, and I think it's quite good actually. I think this here is better than my actual teaching. The reason why here I have to think about each lesson, and the whole course actually comes down to maybe 50 hours or less of teaching. And I think that's an example of creative destruction taking place, because what I do is I plan the lesson, right? I write about the lesson, and then I plan the essay, the lesson on the board, and then here it is. You might not think it's very good, but I think that is an example of creative destruction taking place. Anyway, you need to have all of that in your head when you go into an exam.